Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's commercial seminar. My name is Jenny Ching. I am the commercial director with KW Commercial. And today we're very happy that we are able to invite Rob to talk about commercial NHD and environmental requirements in California. So before we begin, a few housekeeping items. All participants will be muted during the meeting. So please use the chat box for questions and the speaker will answer them during the Q&A session. And also this session will be recorded and then the video will be available later on our YouTube channel. Next, we're gonna have Samson introduce our speaker today. Samson?
Hi, my name is Samson. So with Pinnacle Real Estate Group. So I'm so glad that we have Rob so as our speaker for today. So Rob is the commercial manager at MyNHD. Rob oversees sales for all MyNHD commercial disclosure report in California and is responsible for the strategy plan to grow the division. Rob is passionate about providing personal and impeachable service to his client, developing personal relationship with many of the clients he was worked with over the 20 years. He has been in the disclosure industry, right, Rob?
All right, so again, thank you again all for joining me today. A little background on me, as Samson said, I've been in the NHD industry for over 23 years now, starting with subdivision, which great news too. MyNHD just started a new home developer division. So if anybody is involved with developers and builders, we now have the master reports that they need to submit for DRE, and we also do the individual lot reports for the new home buyers on the new home side of things. So please keep us in mind if you have any questions about that. Give me a ring and I'll take care of things for you. But in that time, I've seen the disclosures required change quite a bit in these 23 years, especially on the residential side. Interestingly enough, on the commercial side of things, it really hasn't changed that much at all. There's been some additional disclosures that have been required, but not much. Like on the residential side, you get a lot of these new fire disclosures, AB 38, SB 63, a lot of local fire disclosures. We know that fires have really been a big issue here in California. Flood zones have also been an issue in the last year with all the rains, and we got more flood issues probably coming with all the glacier melting that's going to be happening. So things are going to change as far as some of these mappings go. But a lot of this is on the residential side of things, and I'm really here to talk to you about the commercial side, but you're going to see me kind of intersperse between the two of them because they do go hand in hand a lot. It's just that residential requires so much more that is mandatory to disclose. But, you know, is it really something that you shouldn't disclose on commercial as well? And we'll talk more about that. But since I've been on the commercial disclosure side of the NHD business, I've actually been surprised at how many times I've been asked if commercial sales require an NHD here in California. I had a lady, her name was Gladys, call me, and we talked for about 2.5 hours yesterday about everything, what Civil Code 1103 actually says. I mean, she really got down into the details, but she's been in the business for over 20 years and she has never used a natural hazard disclosure report on a commercial property because her original broker, when she started in the business, told her it was not required by law. It absolutely is. And when I get these questions from attorneys, or a lot of times it's attorneys or commercial brokers, you know, I kind of send them a couple things, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So let's go through it a little bit. Transactions requiring NHD reports here in California. Well, it's all real property sales. That includes commercial, industrial, residential. A lot of people think mobile homes are not included in this. They absolutely are. Mobile homes are definitely real property transaction. Vacant land, farmland. Basically, anything that's considered a real property transaction here in California needs to have a disclosure report in some manner. And like I said earlier, it's gonna differ a little bit between a residential or commercial. So when I've been asked that question by real estate attorneys or commercial brokers and agents, I always send them a couple things. And first is this article written after the law was passed back in 1998 that's found in the California Bar Journal. this is what attorneys, this is their newsletter, right? This really hits home to the attorneys that question if commercial sales require this or not. And I basically highlight where it says both residential and non-residential property, and that it applies to all real property, real estate transaction, including residential sales, new subdivision sales, and commercial property transactions. And that failure to make the required disclosure may render the seller or seller's agent liable for actual damages suffered to the buyer. So that really hits home to the attorneys. And the commercial brokers, whether they are using AIR, sellers forms, sales forms, or they're using CARS forms, I really love the car disclosure chart that's out there. And if you haven't seen this either for residential or for commercial, it's a great resource to kind of know what's needed and what's required. Basically, I highlight this for commercial and the columns for commercial because that's what I'm usually talking about. And then, area of potential flooding, fire zones, flood zones, I highlight all of them, and also what the law citations are, the California Government Code, and also what the California Civil Code, which mainly for commercial, it's really going to highlight Civil Code 1103, which is the basis for all the disclosure laws that we have on the natural hazard side of things. So Civil Code 1103 is the main law, but those are really the two things I send to people that question it. And when I first started in the commercial side of the disclosure business, one of my main competitors I came to find was actually non-compliance. It wasn't, property ID or, fidelity or whatever. It was people that had never used a disclosure report for a commercial sale before. And some old timers I talked to were very adamant that they never would, that they had never been sued for not providing the disclosure report, and they thought it wasn't something that they should have to do. And I said, well, this is part of the law. Here's the documentation. And you want to be the first person that's ever taken to court, because of that, or do you want it to be the first time for you? So I usually win the argument, but there's some people in the commercial industry that are still kind of stubborn about this. And it just always surprises me because I have the proof in black and white, but just know it is required by law under Civil Code 1103. It is required on every sale. If you do use the AIR forms for your commercial sales, MyNHD is actually listed on the seller's mandatory disclosure notice. We are their preferred vendor, and they do recommend that you utilize us. So that was a nice thing for AIR to do. But it'll definitely say it there in black and white. So for commercial sales in California, there are only 6 mandatory disclosures required by Civil Code 1103. And this has not changed over the past 20 plus years as residential disclosures has. These 6 mandatory state disclosures are exactly the same as the state residential disclosures. It's just that residential sales require more than these 6. So California has kept these 6 as the only mandatory disclosures for commercial sales, and then they leave it up to the buyers to do their due diligence. And that's kind of been the way it's been since the beginning. The buyers are kind of put on the hook to do their due diligence. If they're getting loans on the property, that lender's probably going to require them to do additional site inspections, phase 1 inspections, and additional maybe soil samples, and depending on what they find on the property or surrounding the property. It's really on the buyer to do their due diligence. But in the very most minute way, the seller's requirements are to provide these 6 natural hazard disclosures, just basically to cover themselves by the law. Now, is there anything else besides those 6 that they might want to provide to protect themselves from liability? Right, there are. They shouldn't just rely on what's just required by law. They shouldn't just rely on what the mandatory minimum requirements are, because we've seen the lawsuits in our industry. We've seen the lawsuits saying, and judges saying, number one, you are the local expert in the area, and you should have known, which we kind of think is silly because we're the experts in the disclosure world, right? So, or you should have used a third party like MyNHD or somebody else that provided these local disclosures and these extra disclosures that are available. Not required by law, but a lot of lawsuits happen for things that aren't required by law. So our industry changed over the years since I've been here to include things that aren't required by law, that aren't mandatory. So we'll talk about some of those things that are available for commercial as well as we go through them. So in the interest of time, let's briefly go through the 6 mandatory disclosures that are on the commercial disclosure report. and what they look like. And if you've done residential sales, which I'm sure a lot of you have, they're going to look very, very, very similar. Okay. So the very first one is the one that everybody worries about. Do I need to pay for flood insurance? You know, and actually right now, the biggest worry going on in the real estate industry is, can I even insure my property? Insurance carriers are backing out of California right now, left and right. It's becoming a really huge issue, not just on commercial side, on residential side as well. We have resources for that. We have an insurance company we work with that can help with that. But insurance is becoming a huge, huge deal here in California. And some of you have probably even run into that right now. But this has always been one of the bigger ones. You know, is flood insurance going to be required on the property? Is it in a federal FEMA flood zone? And this is exactly what one of our maps looks like. That's the property right there in green. These are our aerial maps. We love these things. We overlay the FEMA, the parcel level data on top of it, and then highlight the FEMA flood zone that goes right through it. And you can see the property there in green that is definitely in a zone. Flood hazard areas for FEMA are based on the 1% annual chance of being flooded with water at least 1 foot deep from severe storms, often referred to as a 100-year flood zone. So what happens if you're in a FEMA flood zone? Well, if the property is going to require a mortgage to close, escrow, the buyer may be and probably will be required to purchase flood insurance, which that's going to up how much that commercial property's mortgage is going to be. So have your buyer contact the insurance company. And you'll probably hear me say this a lot. Have your buyer contact the insurance company or the city or the county to investigate things a little bit further. You can always help them, I guess, if you're doing it together. But if you do some investigation for them and you give them some information that might not be correct from the county or the city or the insurance company, then they can come back and blame you for it. Always make sure your buyer is doing their due diligence to actually get the information for their property, the property that they're interested in. Have their buyer contact the insurance company to determine the insurance requirements and the premiums. Aerial potential flooding is the next one, and we get a lot of questions on this over the years because it's got the word flooding in it. The first one, that's the FEMA flood zone, has to do with insurance. It might say no, and then this one says yes. And the seller will come back and say, I've never paid for flood insurance. I'm not in a flood zone. And we agree with them. We'll double check, but this has to do with a dam failure. These dam maps are huge. I live in Riverside County, right next to Prado Dam, and that dam almost failed over 10 years ago, took out the golf course, almost totally flooded. And if it flooded, it would have affected my property, but it also would have went all the way to Long Beach, all the way to the ocean. These maps are huge. And so this is why it's called an area potential flooding. Okay, flood insurance is not going to be required. It's not the same as the first question. It's just letting people know that they're near a dam and the potential for flooding could happen. Now, potential for dam failure is not high. Even though our infrastructure is getting really, really old here in California, and actually across the nation with our dams and a lot of different infrastructure, it's still, dam failure is not a high risk. But if people, are worried, like this property is highlighted in green, they're definitely in the path of, a potential dam failure. They can go voluntarily go get insurance themselves. They don't have to, nobody's going to force it on them. But if that's something they were worried about, they really want that property, they can go get dam failure insurance, flood insurance, basically from the same companies that provide that, just like on the FEMA ones. The Department, Office of Emergency Service, and the Department of Water and Power are required to identify these dams where there could be a hazard to life and limb in the event of a dam failure. And that's going to be number 2 on that mandatory one. So then you have the next 2 is that's going to be your high fire and your wildland fire zones. And this is basically talking about, they're both very high fire zones, right? But they're basically talking about where those fire zones are going to be and who's going to be responsible for coming to put that fire out if there is a fire. In your high fire zones, it's going to be your urban areas, going to be your fire department houses, and your wildland fire zones are going to be just like that, more your rural areas, going to be taken care of by the Department of Forestry. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is where this has really changed on the residential side of things. These maps have changed. There's been assembly bills, AB 38, and there's a new one coming down, SB 63, I believe, that has made these fire zones go more to the local area and be more intense as far as how they're looking at them. Not just saying if you're in or out of them, but also saying if it's a low to low, moderate, medium, high. It's giving different varieties of variances of how that fire could be affected in different areas. This is not required on commercial though. We hear that it might be required to have these additional mappings and additional requirements that are basically being put on residential homes right now. And those requirements are basically like home hardening, like making sure that any vents coming into the building have certain kind of spark resistors on them. Vegetation clearance is huge. Certain types of plants now on the residential side of things. We saw this house in Ranch Cucamonga that had this beautiful palm tree, landscape thing. And because there were certain type of palm trees, the fire department basically said that they had to remove all of this expensive landscaping to basically comply with the new kind of rules and regulations for fire abatement and stuff like that. So this has really changed, but again, it has not changed for commercial as yet. But we actually, in our reports, we actually put those local mandates for AB 38 and SB 63, and we actually highlight them for the commercial side as well. And that's because of lawsuits, and that's because of things that we've seen happen. So even though it's not required by law, we're going to put it on our report for the commercial side of things as well. So know that you'll be protected if and when they make it mandatory, but we're protecting you now. Just to let people know, hey, it is in these local zones now, and you need to maybe be aware of that and let buyers know about it. So property owners within these zones are required to clear tree limbs from within 10 feet of any chimneys, stovepipes, tree limbs and clear leaves within 100 feet around the structures, unless it's been exempted by the local government under specified conditions. They basically delineate these zones by assessing the vegetation, topography, dwelling density, and the climate of the area. And, if previous fires have happened, if there's been flooding that has messed up the topography and changed the topography. And guys, these maps are changing left and right in our environment right now, especially when, like I was talking about, with the insurance companies bailing out of California or not writing new policies, or basically telling people that they are canceling their policies now. It's all about the fires and the fire zones. And we've been getting a lot of calls too, because we'll say either you're not in a fire zone, you're not in this AB 38 zone. And then the buyer is coming back to the agent and saying, you said I'm not in a fire zone, but I can't get insurance because the insurance companies are saying that I'm in a fire zone. Well, the insurance companies are using their own maps. They are going above and beyond what the fire authorities have done, whether that's for a liability reason for their own business or a money to raise rates reason. We don't know. We'll double check our reports. We have to go by the official maps that the fire authorities have put out, but just know that the insurance companies are going above and beyond what the fire authorities put out and using their own maps. So just know that could happen, that we can say that it's not in a zone and we'll be absolutely correct, and the insurance companies can still do whatever they want. So that could happen too. It's like the wild west out there with the insurance companies. It's been a very tightly regulated thing here in California for the insurance companies, and that's why they are kind of getting out. Florida's having some of the same issues, but we can talk about that a little bit later. So what to do if you're in one of these two fire zones? It may be very difficult for the buyer to obtain that property insurance, and that insurance will also be very expensive. We were on the phone with our property insurance company that we're working with, that's been helping a lot of buyers get into homes and commercial buildings because of these insurance problems. And they said that they had a client that their insurance rate went up from $9,000, which was already high, up to $26,000 for their homeowners insurance. They showed us the actual policy that was written. That's incredible. And we're seeing more and more examples of that. So it's getting very expensive here in California and other places. So definitely have your buyer as soon as possible. If you're the buyer's agent, this is something that people are losing deals over, because not only if they're not able to get the insurance, but also the time frame to try and get the insurance is taking longer as well. So have your buyer contact the insurance companies ASAP. when they're interested in a commercial property to determine the insurance requirements and premiums, make sure they can get insurance. And then if they're having problems, this is kind of like a last resort, but it does work. It's very expensive. It's kind of like when somebody loses their employment and they're offered COBRA health insurance. They're still able to get that insurance, but COBRA is very, very expensive. Well, California's got a backup plan like that too for insurance called California Fair Plan for difficulties in getting insurance. It's www.cfpnet.com. People can check with that. Again, the insurance company that we work with basically is saying that that's kind of a last resort because it's very, very expensive, but could be the last resort that somebody needs. So just know that that's available as well. You have your earthquake fault zones kind of are across the bear here in California as far as what a major kind of natural disaster could be. Midwest has the tornadoes, East Coast has the hurricanes, the floodings, and earthquake fault zones are kind of our across the bear here. We get a lot of people, especially from out of state, that are very concerned about being in an earthquake fault zone or being near one. Just know they're all around us. They're hitting us all the time. They're little ones, medium ones, large ones like San Andreas, the well-known one. But they're all over the place. They're hitting us constantly, whether we feel them or not. We've been probably due for a big one for a while. People are really worried about that, but they can purchase earthquake insurance if that's something they want to do. And just know that if you're not in an earthquake fault zone, you're probably pretty close to it, right? So they got to take that rupture zone where they see the rupture zone. It discloses potential for fault rupture and fault creep. Fault ruptures when it earthquake instantaneously ruptures the ground when the earthquake is happening. Fault creep is when it just happens over years and years and years of it. California Geological Survey basically delineates zones at least 500 feet wide on both sides of an active fault. So when they find those active faults, they go 500 feet wide on each side of that rupture zone. And that's what an earthquake fault zone is measured as. And if you're in one of those zones, you're obviously going to have some barricades to maybe building or doing things that you might want to on that property. Active faults are faults that indicate surface rupture within the past 11,000 years, which sounds like a long time, but geologically speaking is not very long at all. You have your landslide, which this is our aerial mapping again, and your liquefaction zones. These are both talking about what happens during an earthquake. So landslide, previous occurrence or geologic conditions are present. You don't have to be on the cliffs of Malibu for a landslide to happen. It can be a very gradual slope that's been measured out. Liquefaction is kind of the same way. Geologic conditions are present. Sandy soils, saturated soils are present, and an earthquake can hit and a building can sink. And some of the new the new procedures for new building codes and stuff like that, it takes a lot of that stuff into account for anchoring and stuff. A lot of old buildings that are going to be in these liquefaction areas are not going to have that, and they could sink. It's a liquefaction. It's like what's the word I'm looking for? It's a quicksand-like effect that can happen during an earthquake. So that can happen too. But remember, so on that signature form, those 6 questions, this is the only 2, liquefaction and landslide, that has a yes, no, and map not yet available by the state. State of California has only mapped out about 25% of the state for liquefaction and landslide areas. Riverside County was supposed to be mapped over 12 years ago. We're the next ones to be mapped. I live here in Riverside County. They're not even close to starting it from what I hear. So that's why a lot of local governments have gone out and done their own mapping for liquefaction, landslide, earthquake, flooding, fires. They've done a lot of their own local mapping. And guess what? With the exception on the residential side for the fire zones, AB 38, none of this local stuff is required by law, to disclose to a potential buyer. And especially here on the commercial side, it's just these 6 natural ones that we've talked about. But we're here to protect you and your clients. And we've seen the lawsuits. So we make sure that any sort of local map that's been approved by the general, the safety element and the general contract for that county, if the city or county has gone out and done their own mapping, we're putting it in our report. It's available We're that third-party expert that a judge has cited that you should have used or you should have known was available, that these extra maps. We're putting it in our commercial report. We're going to make it mandatory for our report, even though it's not mandatory by law, to protect the seller and the seller's agent, to let buyers know what is in this area, what is affecting this property. You know, if you ever listen to CAR's Gov Hutchinson, their general counsel, basically, he basically says there's no such thing as over disclosing. Do not put yourself in a position where you're taken to court because you haven't disclosed what may be available to disclose to a potential buyer. It just doesn't make any sense. You're going to find the right buyer for that property. Make sure you're disclosing everything that you need to protect you and your seller. So what happens if you're in an earthquake liquefaction or landslide zone? Being these zones can definitely affect new construction. We get asked all the time about building ADUs or additional structures. You know, I'm in an earthquake fault zone, I'm in a landslide zone, can I do this? We can't give them the answer. All we can do is say, hey, this property happens to be in one of these 3 zones. Your buyer may not be able to build. You know, the buyer needs to contact the city to kind of figure out if they're able to build, if there's any restrictions to build. And if there are, construction codes and costs will be significant if you're in one of these zones, because they got to do additional things to help mitigate these things that they're in. So we talked about the commercial city and county disclosures. If it's available, we're putting it in there. Because failure to disclose this can definitely create liability. And the local data, like with liquefaction and landslide, is used where the state and federal maps, you know, that are mandatory haven't been mapped out yet. They just haven't gotten around to it. So it's definitely a big reason why we definitely do this. Just some kind of visuals. These are kind of the FEMA, not the FEMA, the local county flood maps. This is what we use along with the local county fire zones. This is the Orange County fire map. Has changed so much. There's so many more fire zones now across the state of California. I'm kind of a little bit reverse. I used to be in a fire zone and I'm not in a fire zone anymore. So it worked out good for me. So let's move on. What else is in a MyNHD report that's not required by law on the commercial side, that's required on the residential side? And I wish our property taxes, my property taxes, look like this. It basically lists every single thing that seller is currently paying for, and it breaks it down to everything, what it is, what it's being used for, what it's called, who to contact, and the price the seller is currently paying for, what the Prop 13 general, the ad valorem taxes, exactly what that seller is currently paying for is going to be shown on our NHD tax report. Not required to do this, but there's a reason why it's required for residential, and it should be on commercial, in our opinion, as well. And that's why we provide it. It's because of Melrose and 1915 bonds. If a Melrose is on a property, well, let's put it a different way. If you're having a problem paying your property taxes, how long until the county can start foreclosure proceedings on you? And I know everybody's on mute, so I'll just kind of give you the answer on this one. It's 5 years, which is a good long time if somebody's having a problem paying their property taxes, right? The county can't start foreclosure proceedings within 5 years. However, if there's a Melrose or a 1915 bond on a property, there is most likely what's called an accelerated foreclosure notice that's attached to that Melrose or 1915 bond. And Melrose became a bad word years ago, but developers use it to pay for infrastructure, green belts, schools, sewers, all that sort of thing. But if there's an accelerated foreclosure notice on a property due to a Melrose or a 1915 bond, that commercial property that's having a problem paying their property taxes, foreclosure can start within 90 days, 180 days. We've seen, I've seen a 90-day one. 180 days is usually the standard. So that's a big difference, 180 days versus 5 years. So it's called an accelerated foreclosure notice, and it definitely affects commercial properties just like it affects residential properties. So commercial properties are going to have these on there. We make sure that we highlight it. That's why we're putting this in our tax bill and putting it in our report. So very important to disclose that, even though it's not required by law. And if it is in the property tax bill, we're also going to put this assessment, tax assessment And it's going to give additional resources on what's going on with that Melrose 1915 bond. Basically, again, what it is, who to call, the current levy, but also how much it can go up. And in this case, it can go up another $1,300 a year. That's the maximum tax rate. It's going to give the ending year. And then it also gives us, excuse me, got a little tickle. The maximum tax rate escalator, which in this case, it can increase by 2% every year. So it's really good information for a buyer to have, not required by law, but we've seen people come back and say, you didn't tell me that there was a Melrose on this property that, was going to jump this up this much. So definitely great information to have. It'll protect you and your clients from liability. So we put it in every single one of our reports. So, and the last thing, what else is not mandatory, but we put in our reports, if actually we make this optional because not everybody wants it. And we've had people say they don't want it. So it's optional, but on the commercial side of it, we think it's so very important. Environmental issues. Environmental issues are going to be things that could make or break a commercial deal. That buyer's got to go out and get a very expensive site inspection called a phase 1, maybe even have to go further into phase 2s. Our environmental disclosure report is what we call like a red flag report, a pre-phase 1 report. It gives you up-to-date, upfront information on environmental issues that are happening on the property that's being monitored by state and federal governments or databases, or within 1 mile radius of that property that a buyer might be concerned about. Maybe a lender might be concerned about. These are things that are going to be an upfront kind of red flag for you as the seller's agent to get in front of to help mitigate already, or to know about that it might be a potential issue. All these databases are found in public databases. It's a public report. It's basically the historical records search that's done in a physical phase 1 site inspection, and we're giving that part of it to you guys up front, basically for like $20 more. It's 28 state and federal databases. It can definitely provide the agent with any potential red flags for the sale of the property. And here's what it looked like. And with the exception of our, okay, when I lost you guys, I was talking about the environmental report. A lot of our competitors, or most of the competitors, they take the word environmental or commercial and they slap it on the residential report because they're doing what's mandatory by law and just giving you what they give you in your residential report. We're an actual commercial centric report. They'll give you 7 databases on your environmental side. That's not nearly enough for a commercial environmental report. We give you what is included in the historical record search of that physical phase 1 site inspection. We have 28 state and federal databases that are going to say, hey, is something happening on that property or within 1 mile radius surrounding that property? Is there a Superfund site? Those are the big nasty ones. Is there landslides? Is there underground leaking tanks? That's the more common one. Is there oil wells? Is there chemical companies? Excuse me. Is there solid waste leaks? There's a whole plethora of things that these databases are looking for. And it's going to really give you an upfront look at potential, red flags to the sale of the property. We think it's a great thing. Our clients think it's a great thing, but it is optional because there are some people that, just don't want it. So we do sell it for an additional $20. It's $89.95 or $109 if you do this. Here's the map that you're going to see. It's going to show you the 1/4 mile, 1/2 mile, and a 1 mile radius. A lot of oil wells. I believe this is out in Long Beach, an example of Long Beach and all the different things that are out there. It's going to give you a legend on the bottom telling you what all the circles and the things mean. We think it's something that's very important on the commercial side to actually get. So we advise everybody to get it, but it's definitely up to you. So legally, who shall order the report? It's the responsibility of the seller's agent to order the NHD report. It's their job. It's protecting them from liability and also their seller client. The escrow officer can order the NHD report for the closing if the seller's agent has not ordered it yet. And let me that to the moment. We love our escrow clients. Our escrow officers are amazing, and I know a lot of them do take on some tasks to order the NHD report, to order some other settlement services. However, we would just advise not to. There's no risk to you or your client not to get our report as soon as you get that listing. Know what's going on with flood zones and fire zones up front. Know what's going on with any environmental issues. Know if there's a Mello-Roos or any sort of tax implications that, you know, a buyer is going to be uneasy about. We only get paid if you get paid. If you lose your listing for any reason, you just cancel it for no questions asked. There's no cancellation fees. So again, even though escrow is awesome and amazing, this is a right of rescission document. This is something that they can back out of the deal once the 3 to 5 days, depending on how it's delivered to the buyer, they can use as a reason to back out of the deal. Number one, either they have buyer's remorse, or number two, they actually see something on there in that environmental report, or, you know, that fire or flood zone that worries them, or that earthquake zone that worries them. And now they know about it. And you've taken all that blood, sweat, you know, money, time, tears to get this property into escrow, you know, and then you allow escrow to order this NHD, this $100 NHD report, and the buyer can use it as a way to back out at that time. We've seen it happen. It's not a happy time for anybody. There's no risk to your client to get this as soon as possible. Get it, know if there's any red flags on the report. And then when it goes into escrow, you just pass the invoice over to escrow and say, please pay for the NHD report. Now, we also know that a lot of these, especially on the commercial side of things, it can go 3, 6 months, 9 months, a year till you get it into escrow and it closes. That's okay. Know about this stuff up front. When you get a buyer, just ask us for a free update. We'll double check everything. We'll put a new date on it, and we'll send it back out to you free of charge. There's no risk to have this at the time you get your listing. Know what's going on with the property, have all the information that you need to make it informed, you know, help the buyer to make an informed decision, or see if there's any issues you need to help mitigate. So how can we help? We definitely provide a quick and easy way to do this at our website. 24/7, guys. We're doing this on the weekend for you guys. My mom's been an agent for 40 years now, and I know things get hectic and we forget about things, and you got to order something at the last minute. We're here for you on the weekends, 24/7. Things are coming back, you know, within 10 minutes. Easy access to the combined hazard books, and know who you're doing business with. If you look at some of our competitors' liability language in their things, one of our most major competitors, if you order their commercial report and there's an error, you can only get back the price, that $123 that you paid for the report. That is scary. A lot of the competitors have changed their liability language. Look at our liability language. We actually list every single person that can be in the deal, from the escrow officer, buyer's agent, seller's agent, seller, buyer, TC, assistant. They're all listed in black and white in our report, and there's not a limitation of like the price of our report. We have our E&O insurance, and we don't force arbitration. A lot of the competitors have changed their liability language, and nobody's noticed. Know who you're doing business with. Know who's going to be there to protect you in the end. You shouldn't be able to only to get back the $123 you paid for an NHD report if somebody makes an error. Okay, you should have some liability protection. Every report by MyNHD is backed by $10 million of E&O insurance from a California company, which is Farmers, paid through escrow, no charge for cancel orders, but get it up front. Protect yourselves, please. Like I said, it's $89.95 for the mandatory, which complies with law, plus the additional local stuff we give you. I suggest you get the environmental as well for the $109 to protect yourselves and get some additional red flags to help you out if you need them. But that's totally up to you. Order at the time of listing. It's kind of redundant. Our website called toll free 800-814-2922, or you call, email, or text me directly. Sage can also help you. You guys probably already have Sage's information, but definitely here's my information as well. And I think Sage already might have put it into the chat already too. If she did, thank you, Sage. I appreciate it. But I know this will be recorded. You guys can send me an email. I can do personal presentations for your different offices if you need them, that sort of thing. Somebody just asked me yesterday if these are good for educational credits. They are not, unfortunately. They're not certified through the Department of Real Estate. But we believe it's great information. I feel our job is to educate you guys and to help you guys make sure that nothing bad happens with a natural hazard report, and that you guys are totally educated on what you need. And to that end, we had a lot of clients ask us for commercial leases. We've seen lawsuits, and it actually became mandatory here in California for residential to disclose dam inundation and FEMA flood zones. We took it a step farther with commercial and said, you know, it's not mandatory, but our property management companies and our brokers that are doing a lot of leases are looking for this to protect themselves from liability too. For $24.95, we're giving you all 6 natural hazard state mandated ones: flood, dam, the 2 fire zones, liquefaction, landslide, earthquake. Plus, I think there's a water conserving fixture thing that CAR recommends for commercial as well. Still covered by our $10 million P&L. It's paid for at the time of ordering because there's no escrow, so it's $24.95. Streamlined report, 6 pages. But this helps protect your lease owners and also inform their tenants by disclosing potential natural hazards that may affect property and insurance rates. That tenant may want to go get additional renter's insurance for the stuff in their commercial building. The owner is now protected from liability, even though it's not required by law yet on the commercial side of things. This gives them a way to do that as well. So just know this is new. It's going like gangbusters. It's available through our company and our company only. So if that's something that you guys need, please let us know. And lastly, thank you yet again from Sage and I for allowing us to be here. Please, if there's any questions, Samson, I'm not sure if you want to roll through them or.
Yep. So thank you so much, Rob. And now it's our FAQ time. So if anybody have questions, feel free to ask.
I know there were some questions in the chat. I don't have them anymore. They're not showing up on my chat, but I know there were some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I saw a couple come in and they disappeared when I got disconnected. I apologize for that. So if anybody does have a question, please just unmute yourself and we can make it interactive.
Yeah, we have one question. I think the first question already answered. So because the maps change so rapidly, do your reports have a date on the bottom of each page?
They do. They have a date on
Okay.
the bottom of each page. And then like I said, as these commercial or residential, you know, these deals could go a little long. Get it at the time you get your listing, and then when you actually get a buyer, if it's been 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, if it's been a couple of weeks, you shouldn't have any problems. The fire maps are probably the ones that are changing the most right now because of everything that's going on. But definitely anytime, just call us. We'll just put a new date on it after we double check and make sure there's been no changes, or if there has been, we update it, and then we'll email it right back out to you guys free of charge.
All right, that's a great answer. Thank you so much, Rob.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have questions?
Having data on all these, okay, so this is from Wyoming. Having data on all these inherent risk areas on NHD report is helpful from a knowledge standpoint. But if the disasters actually happen, can a buyer later sue us, despite that it is an act of nature beyond our control? In this case, NHD is a way of relieving our liability? Will the potential disasters be covered by the buyer's homeowner insurance, etc.? Realistically, I'm not sure buyer reads this report carefully. They just want to live in that area. I feel helpless, as before the events, there isn't much we can do for preventing marriages. And that's absolutely correct. You cannot be sued. Well, let's put it another way. Anybody, especially here in California, can sue anybody for anything. But when they get this report, they are actually signing off. And let me back up for a second. I absolutely advise you, and I know there's people that, I know there's agents, I know agents personally that just have their clients sign here, sign here, sign there, sign there. I know the stack of paperwork is big, and I know that natural hazard disclosure is probably not the most exciting thing in the world, but you absolutely must make sure you are discussing with your client what's going on in this natural hazard disclosure report, especially anything that is if they're in an earthquake fault zone, if they're in a fire zone. I would actually have them initial next to the end, even though they sign at the bottom. And there's a box on that form, that signature form, that releases you as the agent from all liability. That's the state statutory form. That's in a box. It transfers all liability for all the information contained within the report from you, the seller's agent, over to us, the third-party provider of that information. We are taking all the liability. You as the agent are signing there to say, yes, that this third-party company is providing all this information. They are taking all this liability off of us. But this is an informational thing. This is something we are providing to a potential buyer so they know what they are getting into if they buy this property. If they were to come back and sue anybody and say, I was caught in a fire and they told me I was in a fire zone, they knew the risks. That's why these reports came out, to prevent actual lawsuits from happening. The buyer is actually saying they have knowledge now that they are in a fire zone or a flood zone or earthquake zone or a fire zone. And even though that they know this, or they know that they're not in a zone, that they are still going to purchase the property. So that lawsuit's not going to go very far, because that's why this law was made in 1998, to protect buyers, number one, from not knowing what's going on, and also to protect the sellers, to provide this information through a third party to let them know what the inherent risks are if they do purchase this property. So it's protecting everybody in that thing. And then if a buyer still wants to sue people, they can, but it's not going to go anywhere. They've signed off on this document. The only chance that a buyer might have is that they can prove that you as the agent did not walk through the report with them to show them what was in the report. And we know it happens. We know that people just sign. That's an inherent risk, no matter what that person is signing, that it was not discussed with them, that the due diligence was not provided by their agent, or I forget the word I was actually looking for, but your dedication, the legal dedication that you have to that responsibility. If you're not doing that, then you're not providing that to the agent, to the buyer, then they might have a case. They've signed off on it. They know the risks. That's what's protecting all the parties in the transaction. And we take the liability for providing that information by providing those disclosures. So hopefully that helps, but that's kind of how everybody's protected in this way. Does that make sense?
All right. Go ahead.
Sage, did you want to?
I just had 2 comments. So another thing to think about is, if you are having a client that actually takes the time to read this and they have a specific question about what is in the report, please contact us. It's not your job to understand every single detail within that NHD report. It's our job. And we will answer the questions for you. And if I do not know the answers, that's why we have an amazing team. I go to Rob, or we have a geological technician on staff. His name is Ralph. He is amazing. For example, there is a Fairfax explosion in Los Angeles, Fairfax, a methane gas explosion. So since that happened, now if there's methane gas anywhere, we have to disclose it. A realtor was having her client locate from Miami to California. And she asked me, what is this? Can you get me a little bit more details on this? So we had Ralph, our geological tech, come on, look at all the details of it. We were able to explain to the client, hey, this is what level of methane gas it is. This is the history of it. And this is what you should be aware of. And the client was like, oh, okay, thank you so much for explaining it to me. But it's rare. A lot of people don't actually read their NHD. But when they do, and if you guys do as well, and you have any questions, please reach out to us. We love doing this. We love talking about it. And we're always here to help you. Another thing to think about is we have a great tool. Say that you're curious if your property, your cousin's property, anyone's property is in a flood or fire zone. You can text me, you can call Ralph. We will let you know whether or not a property is in a flood or fire zone for free. All we need is the APN or the address, and we will get that information to you. So say that you haven't even gotten the listing yet, or you're trying to get a listing and you're like, hey, I actually have this great tool to tell you whether or not you're in a flood or fire zone, everything that's going on with insurance companies, what other agent is going to offer you that tool? So please utilize us. And thank you, Rob, again for doing everything. You're amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Sage. I appreciate it. And I totally forgot about that tool, guys. It's something that we just started. It's something that's free. Agent wants to know about, fire or flood zone, they can call Sage or myself and just say, hey, here's the APN or here's the address. I'm just curious. I'm doing a listing presentation tonight and I wanted to have all the information and I want to be able to tell them, look, you are in a fire zone, or did you know you were in a fire zone? If not, you are, and might be some insurance issues. It gives you more information and it's free of charge, and we can do it within minutes and get that information back to you. And then hopefully you get that listing and then you order the report from me or Sage and everybody's happy. So I forgot about that, Sage. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
All right. I guess we have no more questions. Again, thank you so much, Rob and Sage.
Thank you very much, everybody. I hope everybody has a
All right.
wonderful week. Take care.
So on behalf of the West San Gabriel Realtors Association, thank you, Rob, for your presentation today. And audience, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to him and the Sage directly. And one last thing to remind everyone is to please check out the education classes on our website. And we do have a few other sessions in August. On August 9, we have the no compromise retirement taxes disclassified. And on August 22nd, we have how to streamline land entitlement process and the ADU. So please go to our website and register. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Sage. Bye.
Thank you.